Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbul masyriqaini wa rabbul maghribain. Fabi ayyi ala'i rabbikuma tukadziban. مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العظيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه على كل حال حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيده واعف عنا يا كريم يا رحيم يا ربي يا الله يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك ومجدك سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم عليه اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وخطايانا كلها يا رب العالمين اللهم بلغ مرادنا وحصل مقاصدنا فاقض حوائجنا يا قاضي الحاجات اللهم يا غني يا حميد يا مبدئ يا معيد يا رحيم يا ودود يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك نستغيث اكفنا بحلالك عن حرامك واغننا بطاعتك وفضلك عمن سواك اللهم اوصل وبلغ ثواب ما قرأناه من كلامك العزيز هذه هدية وافية ورحمة نازلة وبركة شاملة وتحفة كاملة مقبولة مرضية متصلة منك إلى روح سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم خاصة خصوصا إلى روح من نبيناه مرحوم عبد العزيز اللهم اغفر له وارحمه اللهم اغفر له وارحمه وعافه واعف عنه واكرم نزله ووسع مدخله واغسله بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقيه من الذنوب والخطايا كما ينقى الثوب الابيض من الدنس ربنا رب ارحم والدينا رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا صل اللهم على النبي الامي واله وصحبه وسلم امين سبحان ربك رب العزه عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce the head table. We have Mr. A.M.A, President of the A.M.A Conference, still extreme right. Mr. Khalid M. Farooq, President of the Dr. A.M.A. Azeez Foundation, and our chief guest today, Dr. A.C.L. Ameer Ali. This function is every year organized jointly by the two organizations, Dr. A.M.A. Azeez Foundation and the A.M.A Conference. And today we have with us as chief guest Dr. A.C.L. Ameer Ali, who will be delivering the memorial oration. Before that, I would like to invite the president of the Dr. A.M.A. Azeez Foundation, Mr. Khalid M. Farooq, to address you.
Respected members of the clergy, our guest speaker, Dr. Ameer Ali, Mr. Nafi, National President of the A.M.A Conference, Mr. Rahim, Secretary of the A.M.A Foundation, Mr. A.M.A, Ali Azeez and members of the marhum Azeez family, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Dr. A.M.A Azeez Oration. Today we have in our midst a learned scholar, a distinguished old boy of Zahir College, Dr. A.C.L. Ameer Ali, from the School of Business and Governance, Murdoch University, Australia. Incidentally, he happens to be a classmate of mine at Zahir. Dr. Ameer Ali will be delivering the oration on the subject from Islamophobia to Westophobia, the long road to Islamic Radicalisation. We are thankful to Dr. Ameer Ali for accepting our invitation to deliver the keynote address. I must also mention that the doctor delivered an inspiring speech on an earlier occasion in the Commemoration Day. We are today gathered here to commemorate the death anniversary of Dr. A.M.A Azeez. He was the foremost Muslim educationist, having the distinction of being the first Muslim civil servant, having excelled in the field of administration. Dr. Azeez took over as director principal of Zahir College, Colombo, for Dr. A.M.A. During his stewardship, Zahir excelled and flourished not only in the field of education, but also in the sports and other extracurricular activities, prompting a former Sri Lankan president to describe Zahir as one of the greatest public schools in our country. He was also honored to be nominated as a senator to the upper house of the parliament. Among the many institutions established by Dr. Azeez, the A.M.A Conference and the A.M.A Muslim Scholarship Fund continue to illuminate the lives of the Muslim community. Many may not know that Jamia Malimia Yerwala was initiated by marhum Ali Madia along with marhum A.M.A Azeez, and today it stands out as a leading higher education institution. I am duty bound to thank the A.M.A Conference, for which I am also party, for continually associating with the A.M.A Azeez Foundation to commemorate this annual event. Also, I would like to thank Mr. A.M.A, another classmate of mine, for writing a very interesting article on Dr. Azeez for publication in the print media, and also for agreeing to compose the vote of thanks. I sincerely thank all of you for your kind presence and participation on this occasion in remembering Dr. Azeez. Assalam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Farooq, for your address. Mr. Farooq actually became the president of the Dr. A.M.A Azeez Foundation, succeeding marhum S.H.M. Jabir, who was the president earlier. Next on the agenda, I would like to invite Mr. M.N. Nafi, the national president of the A.M.A Conference, to address.
Respected members our guest speaker, Dr A.C.L. Ameer Ali, Mr. Khalid M. Farooq, President of the Dr A.M.A. Azeez Foundation, Mr. M. Mohid, Chairman of the A.M.A. Board of Trustees, Mr. M. Rahim, Secretary, Mr. A.I. Malika, and Mr. Ali Azeez, and members of the Marhum Azeez family, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, Aibo and Wanakam. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Dr. A.M.A. Azeez Memorial Oration. Since the sad demise of Marhum Azeez, the All Ceylon A.M.A. Conference had been commemorating his death anniversary from year 1975. The first commemoration function was held under the chairmanship of Mr. M.I.M. Hussain, District Judge, with Mr. S.M. Kamaldeen as Secretary. After the formation of the Dr. A.M.A. Azeez Foundation, the YMMA collaborated with Dr. A.M.A. Azeez Foundation in organizing the memorial oration. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very much pleased to welcome Dr. Ameer Ali. I am the first national president of All Ceylon YMMA Conference from the Eastern Province, and it gives me added pleasure to welcome the learned speaker who also hails from the East. All are aware that Marhum A.M.A. Azeez was the founder of All Ceylon YMMA Conference. In his own words, the organization was inaugurated to meet a new generation of men worthy of the highest tradition of Islam and capable of highest deeds to serve this country in every branch of modern life. I wish to thank Dr. Azeez Foundation in organizing this memorial oration in association with All Ceylon YMMA Conference. We will move forward with faith, unity, and discipline. I thank you all for your presence on these occasions. Wassalam, Nandri, Aiwan.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard the two presidents addressing you because it's jointly organized by the two organizations. Next, we come to the main item on the agenda, the memorial oration to be delivered by Dr. A.C.L. Ameer Ali. Before I invite Dr. Ameer Ali, I would like to introduce him. Dr. A.C.L. Ameer Ali, B.A. Honours Ceylon, Masters, London, PhD, West Australia, is a Sri Lankan scholar domiciled in Australia. He is a senior academic lecturing in economics at Murdoch University in Perth. He was a former student of Zaira College when A.M.A. Azeez was the principal. Apart from his specialty in economics, he has developed a keen interest in Muslim affairs, and in that respect, he has published numerous research articles in international journals and presented several papers at international conferences. He is heavily involved in Muslim community affairs in Australia and was the Vice President and then President of the Australian Federation of Islamic Councils, holding each of those positions for 4 years respectively. He was also the head of the Muslim Advisory Group under the Howard government. Currently, he is one of the trustees of the Nurul Islam Society and Mira Buka Mosque in Perth. And I would like to invite Dr. Ameer Ali to deliver the memorial oration From Islamophobia to Westophobia, the long road to Islamic radicalization. Ms. Ameer.
Chairman, members of the Asia Foundation, Azeez Foundation, and our personal organization. My friends, well-wishers, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to address this august audience. And on this occasion, for the second time in my life, when I addressed for the first time, I devoted quite a large number of time, or of the space, to talk about the services that A.M.A. Azeez has done in this country and its community. I'm not going to repeat it now. I'll cut short my introduction about Marhum A.M.A. Azeez. I'll get on to my topic because I think today it is the most burning topic in the world. I want to express my observations. I'm not going to claim that I am right, but I want to put forward what I have found throughout my research over the last 20 years at least. Abu Bakr Muhammad Abdul Aziz, popularly known as Senator Azeez, was not only an incomparable Muslim intellectual and educationist of his time, but also a staunch lover of Islam and a keen observer of the developments in his own community as well as in the Muslim world in general. In all his writings and speeches, one could detect the underlying influence of the Islamic religious and cultural spirit that shaped his thought and outlook. He was a lover of the poetry of Iqbal, and in an intellectual partnership with my father, Abdul Qadir Lebbe, who was also a poet and philosopher, Azeez was instrumental in introducing Iqbal to Sri Lankan literary public. He was yearning to see the return of the glorious days of Islamic civilization, when Muslims were at the cutting edge of scientific knowledge and rational thought. Had he lived today, I am certain that he would have been appalled at the strategic turn of events in the Muslim world in the 20th and 21st centuries, and at the reaction towards them from the outside. It is therefore fitting that this memorial lecture addresses a subject that would have been closer to Azeez's heart. Since the explosive entry of Al-Qaeda in 2001 and the Islamic State of Iraq and Shams, ISIS, in 2013, onto the international stage as violent political enterprises, the issue of Islamist, I'm not calling Islamic, Islamist radicalism and measures to combat the spread of that phenomenon has occupied international stage. However, the phenomenon of Muslim radicalization with the episodic manifestations of violence is not only a 21st century occurrence, but has genealogical antecedents in the long historical relations between Europe and Islam. What I shall endeavor to do in the next few minutes is to trace that genealogy and address some of the root causes of Islamist radicalism. It is a refusal to look at these root causes by world leaders that has made Islamist radicalism an attractive alternative to a new generation of Muslims who feel victimized by the reigning world order. To start with, the fear and therefore the hatred of Islam, or what you might call Islamophobia, at first box, started in medieval Christendom almost immediately after the birth of Islam. When Muslim Arabs in the 7th century began their campaign of territorial expansion beyond the Arabian Peninsula, Islamdom, I'm borrowing a phrase from Marshall Hobson, Islamdom posed an existential threat to the Latin Christian establishment. The Islamophobia thus emerged in Christendom, especially within its religious elite, condemned Islam as heresy, his prophet as Antichrist, and his followers as pagans. Christendom's response to Islam's challenge was understandably militaristic and not dialogical or evangelical. After several setbacks, the Battle of Tours in 723 and 11 years after the Battle of Poitiers were the first two of the military victories that Christendom achieved in its earliest encounter with Islam. It is from these encounters, memorable to the Christians but trivial to the Muslims, that one can find the origins of Europe and European identity in history. Islam is thus one of the conditions of Europe's emergence and identity. And if I may quote the historian Henry Pirret, the Belgian historian, he put it very, very quickly that without Muhammad, Charlemagne would have been inconceivable. It was in the last quarter of the 11th century, however, and with the commencement of the First Crusade, that Islamophobia became a populist project in Europe. I underline that word, populist project in Europe. Pope Gregory VII's denunciation of the pagans and Saracens, and later Pope Urban II's address at Claremont set the tone for an anti-Islamic discourse that was to become the first Christendom's, and later, after the French Revolution, the West standard measure of judging Islam and Muslims. The anti-Islamic discourse born out of the Crusades received further intellectual sustenance from the Orientalist project after the Enlightenment and provided the political and cultural justification for European colonization of the Muslim world. The same discourse became the basis of justification for the British massacre of the Muslims in Delhi during the 1957 mutiny. And in the 21st century, it provided the pretext for the US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. In promoting this anti-Islamic discourse, the role played by theologians in medieval Europe is replayed by the West, and particularly in the US by pompano intellectuals, establishment journalists, conservative think tanks, and native informers. According to Muhammad Salam, an Egyptian sociologist, a scholar, the institutionalized Islamophobia, again I underline the word, institutionalized Islamophobia, was the lingering effects, these are his words, the lingering effects of a crooked history of an anti-Islamic discourse that not only legitimized colonial and imperial domination, but also managed to reproduce itself in the post-colonial and sustain its underlying xenophobic course after the present day, unquote. On the other hand, Christendom's anti-Islamic discourse did not mean that the Christian and Islamic worlds lived in isolation from each other. Economic, commercial, and intellectual intercourse increased over time, but it did not remove the anti-Islamic image that Europe nurtured. Instead, as Andrew Wheatcroft of University of Stirling writes, and quoting here, the initial crudity of the image was made more subtle, both by adding new dimensions as circumstances changed, so that the crude parodies of the Prophet Muhammad tended to diminish, while other more baroque descriptions of Islamic virulence multiplied. Within the world of Islam, and within its political vocabulary, the name West, as we understand it today, was absent until the 19th century. For that matter, even to the Westerners, it was only in the 19th and early 20th century that the idea of the West acquired the role and range of meanings that are familiar for them today. However, as Hamid Davesh of Columbia University argues, while the West was the self-congratulatory pronouncement of all things good and admirable, for Muslims, it became the symbolic construction of corrupted excellence, an objective discrete adoration and manifest hatred. In whichever way one accepts, Islam, the binary Islam and the West, is the product of the European colonial enterprise and The name Islam itself, as a monolithic entity, devoid of its immense heterogeneity, is an inferior product. There is no Islam, but there are Islams. Even then, there was no Europhobia or hatred of Europe at that time by the Muslims, let alone Westophobia, because, as Bernard Lewis, the ardent critic of Islam, here I'm quoting his words, because Muslim civilization, proud and confident of its superiority, could afford to despise the barbarous infidel in the cold and miserable lands of the north, and for the medieval Muslims in the Mediterranean lands, the Europeans, at least to the north and the west, was a remoter and more mysterious figure than the Indian, the Chinese, or even inhabitants of tropical Africa. While Christendom was denigrating Islam, Muslims, on the other hand, considered Christianity an imperfect religion and argued that Prophet Isa's true message was corrupted by his followers and therefore had to be renewed by a new and final message revealed to Prophet Muhammad. Thus, right through the medieval period, Islam remained indifferent and uninterested in the backward and infidel peoples who lived in the lands of the north of the Mediterranean. So while Islamophobia, original Islamophobia was hatred of Islam, the Muslims ignored it. With the rise of Ottoman, however, Islamophobia in Europe metamorphosed into Turkophobia, or fear and hatred of the accursed Turk. In spite of this, however, there was never an anti-Europe or a counter-Christendom in the Islamic world. A determined indifference towards, if not total ignorance, of developments in the West might have been inconsequential to medieval caliphate, given Islam's expanding political power and self-proclaimed superiority of civilization. But that indifference became dangerously obsolete by the end of the medieval era. Coming to the second stage. After the 15th century, and with the age of discoveries, the Enlightenment project and Europe's scientific and technological breakthrough, the center of political and economic gravity had started shifting away from the caliphate. It was a paradigm shift that witnessed the simultaneous rise of Europe and a parallel decline of Islamic empire. This shift, which began the process of Ottoman capitulation to European powers from the 16th century, advanced steadily so that by the end of the 19th century, almost the entire Islamdom had fallen under Europe's colonial domain. European conquest and colonization of Muslim Orient was Occident's ultimate payback for centuries of humiliation endured by Western Britain. The entire Orientalist enterprise, spearheaded by Britain and France in the 18th and 19th centuries, until that leadership was taken over by the United States in the 20th, was, in the final analysis, not only an attempt to break the military might of Islamdom, but also to expropriate its economic resources, to reinforce through systemic indoctrination and propaganda an Orientalist view of Islam and its culture as backward, if not barbaric, and to prevent forever the re-emergence of an Islamic threat to the West. Yet,